Hello viewers! So in our last video I gave you guys some tips on how to play when you're white. We didn't quite cover all of black's options there, so this time we'll finish up and look at two more systems you might have to face. The Pirc and the Sicilian. Someday you'll see D6. This is kind of rare. This is called the Pirc. So this is what's called part of the hypermodern school of chess. So both hypermodern and classical players agree that control of the center is important. They disagree on how to go about doing it. Classical players prefer to occupy the center with pawns, like what we're doing over here. We have pawns of both e4 and d4. That's the way to go if you're a classical player. A hypermodern player prefers to attack the center from a distance. So after knight f6 and attacking the pawn, we'll play knight c3, defending it, and they'll play g6 and bring their bishop to g7, so the bishop is trying to influence the center while not actually being in the center. So what I recommend against this setup is to do something very similar. So they're going to play g6 and bring out their bishop to g7. Let's play g3 and bring our bishop out to g2. And then after they castle, let's play knight to e2. So why I'm not playing knight to f3 is because my knight in f3 would block my bishop. So it's more harmonious. I put my knight at e2, so my bishop has a clear view of the pawn and the center. So here I just have more space, and we're a little bit better. So what you're going to do is you're going to castle eventually, probably in the next move, and then you can you might play h3 just to stop any knight g4, bishop g4 stuff, because you want to play bishop e3 without being harassed by knight g4. And you can play f4 and grab some more space, and even think about attacking if all goes well. So one last move to talk about. The most popular reply to e4 is what's called the Sicilian defense. That's pawn to c5. So black's trying to control the center, stop you from playing d4, but he's using a flank pawn to do so. So now I'll play knight f3 and prepare to play d4. So there are a lot of things black can do here, but the same general plan is going to work against a lot of them. So one thing black can do, for example, is play e6. So now you'll play d4, grabbing the center, and preparing to bring out your bishop someday. We trade pawns. And now after knight f6, be a little bit careful here. You don't want to play e5 because that just drops a pawn. Queen a5 check, you gotta get out of check, and once you've done that, black just picks up this pawn next move, so that would be a mistake. So don't do that. Instead, defend your pawn with knight to c3. So because knight c3 blocks the check from the queen, now you really are starting to play e5, so black should play d6 or something to stop you from advancing your pawn. So now this general system that works against a lot of Sicilians is you can play just bishop e2, and then castle kingside, and then play f4. So you're grabbing some more territory in the kingside, and you're thinking about starting an attack someday. So black often plays a6 in the Sicilian. So he has a couple of things in mind. First of all, he's stopping from playing knight b5 anytime, and also black is thinking about playing pawn to b5 himself. That would prepare to harass your knight, and also bring his bishop out to harass your e4 pawn. So it's often a good idea to meet a6 with a4, just shutting down any b5 plans. And now after something like, say, queen c7, we bring our king to some extra safety, king h1. So when I was new to chess, I often thought that king h1 is kind of just a wasted move. There's no actual threat to the king on g1, so why should I bother with this? Then I found that I kept getting hammered by tricks on this diagonal. So I found I just bring my king to h1, early in the game when it's not actually necessary. I just avoid all those shenanigans, and that way I don't get blown off the board in the first 20 moves. So what you'll do in this setup that works against, again, a lot of Sicilians is you'll play your bishop out to e3, and you can reinforce the center by playing bishop to f3, and if all goes well, you even start attacking with playing g4 and then g5 to kick that knight away. So black's going to think about how to develop his pieces on the queen side. He could play knight c6, could play knight d7. Views differ on what's the best way to do it. The bishop might come out to b7 after, say, b6. And black's going to try to get some attack going on the queen side over here. So that's what you do if you're white against a lot of Sicilians. Now, a couple of Sicilians require a different approach. So black could also play what's called the dragon variation. So it starts with d6, and then we play d4. We trade pawns. Black is now attacking your pawn over here, so let's defend it. And this is the start of the dragon, where black plays g6. That's the defining moment of the dragon variation. So a lot of variations of the dragon get very complicated, so I'm going to recommend a very simple system for you guys. Let's imitate black and play pawn to g3. So when they bring their bishop out to g7, we'll bring our bishop out to g2 with similar play. So they play knight c6. I recommend actually bringing the knight back over here, and then after bishop g7, we play bishop g2. So what we're doing here is we're really trying to target the d5 square. So our bishop here is eyeballing d5, our knight's eyeballing d5. Because I brought my knight over here out of the way, my queen is also eyeballing d5. Sometimes, this doesn't always work, but sometimes you can also play knight f4 and get even more control over d5. Now, d5 is a bit of a weakness for black in the dragon. Here's why. In a lot of Sicilians, black would like to play e6 and just cover that square. If you do so in a dragon, though, that leaves the d6 pawn vulnerable. That's because there's no bishop protecting d6. So that's why white's going to really try to target d5, and black has some difficulties in trying to defend that square. Some other Sicilians to know about. Black can also play knight c6 over here. And then we'll start in the same way. Play d4, trade some pawns. So there's also what's called the accelerated dragon, and we'll learn more about that in the next video. So here black is trying to play the same kind of system. Bring up the bishop to g7, control the center, but he's trying to save a tempo by not playing d6. So in this case, I recommend let's play what's called the Maroczy bind, c4, and get some extra control over that all-important d5 square. So they play bishop g7, attacking your knight, so let's defend it with our bishop. And if they attack our pawn with knight f6, we'll defend it by playing knight c3. And again, we'll learn more about the system in our next video. Alright, the very last Sicilian we want to learn about is after knight c6, d4, trade, there is knight f6. So again, you don't want to play e5 because, well, obviously black would just take it. So let's defend the pawn instead. So black can play what's called the Sveshnikov and play e5. So now we play knight b5. We're threatening to go to d6. So black should cover that square playing pawn to d6. Next we play bishop to g5. And black will drive back the knight by playing a6. We retreat. And now black is threatening to play b4, which would be a fork. A fork is where you attack two pieces at the same time. So you're hitting both this knight and that knight. You can only move one piece at a time, so if you let black play b4, black's going to win a piece and it'll be busted. So let's not do that. Let's play bishop takes f6. The most common move here is pawn takes f6, and I play knight d5, so now b4 would only hit one knight instead of two, so we're fine. So some chess coaches might be horrified that I'm telling you a complicated system like the Sveshnikov to a beginner, but hear me out. At the elite levels, the Sveshnikov is indeed very complicated. At the lower levels, I argue that it's actually a lot easier to play white side than to play black side. So if unless black is playing very dynamically, unless he's at least probably 1800, he won't really know how to do that. If black's not playing really dynamically, then this knight d5 is just going to be a monster. So you'll do things like you'll play bishop d3, and you'll castle. Your queen might find a nice home over here on h5. Now you do have to do something about your knight over here on a3. It's not very well placed. It's on the side of the board and not really influencing the game very much. You want to bring it back to c2, and you could do that by playing either c3 or you could play c4. There's a trade-off. If you play c4, you cement your control of d5, but you also weaken control of d4. That's the trade-off. If you play c3, you protect d4, but you're not reinforcing d5. So that's a decision you have to make. So after you play either c3 or c4, the knight can come back to c2 and re-enter the game that way. So unless black is really good, probably at least 1800, they're not going to really know how to make the most of their dynamic potential, and this piece over here has to be a monster, and they'll have a very tough time indeed. So that's what you do if you have white. Be sure to tune in for our next episode to learn how to handle the black pieces.